Police officers of Reddit. What is your best, I think we have the wrong person, story? I remember when my son was 3 weeks old. It's 3 a.m. and I'm lying down on the couch. Baby is in his rocker. Suddenly there's a loud knocking on my door followed by police. I thought for sure it was my friends coming back from the bar and they needed a place to crash. And they have done the police knock thing to me before. So I'm sitting there mad thinking, don't they know I have a kid? Needless to say, I didn't answer the door, figured they could find somewhere else to crash. Next thing I know, my door is kicked down. I grab baby and run towards the door and 4 or 5 police officers run in. They search my house with flashlights, scared the crap out of my sleeping husband. My 5-year-old didn't wake up though. Turns out they had the wrong address. They apologized and a week later they installed a new door for me, but holy crap, that was scary. The fact that their 5-year-old did not wake up is incredible. That is a heavy sleeper kid. Kid was tuckered out, for sure. Story 2. I was a curious little kid. My father stopped at the local liquor store to grab a bottle of wine, and I was poking around. The door to the office was unlocked, and I wandered inside. Sat in the chair and spun around a few times, got bored, wandered out. A few days later, my father gets a call from the police, and we go in. As the officer is speaking to us, I proceeded to spin around in the chair and pick up and look at everything on his desk. After about a minute, the officer says, "Thank you for coming in. I see what happened. You can go." Turned out the owner's teenage son stole a few grand from the store and tried to blame it on the handsy 5-year-old. Story 3. I got blamed for stealing from an employer once. I knew I was innocent, obviously, but besides them, I was the only one to handle cash or the till. Big argument ensues, and just as I'm about to walk out, I notice their 3-year-old daughter playing in the till. I watch her grab the $150 I had collected earlier. I'm in Canada, and the $50 are different shades of red. Or pink to a 3-year-old. I pointed out what their daughter was doing, and they became very defensive, not apologetic. Turns out they always let her play in the cash drawer, and she never took anything out. Right then, she announces proudly, "No, Mommy, I don't take anything but the pink ones because I like pink, so they're mine." Never did get an apology. I took the next job I could find, and their business went under shortly after. Hey, I'm with the kid. If I could choose between a whole bunch of bills, pink ones, they're pretty good. Good choice, kid. Story 4. 2 of my colleagues, murder squad detectives, attended custody to meet a defendant answering bail. When they arrived at the custody desk, there were a couple of people hanging around waiting for their solicitors. They told the custody sergeant that they were there for insert name, and he pointed one of the guys out. They went up and introduced themselves and said that they would be questioning him at another station, so all 3 got in the car and headed off. Whilst driving, they told the defendant what would be happening. On arrival, he would be arrested on suspicion of attempted murder, questioned, and either bailed or remanded. The guy was like, "You've got to be joking. Attempted murder? I was shoplifting." He was relatively calm, half laughing and shaking his head. A short time later, one of the officers got a call from the custody sergeant. Their actual bail appointment had arrived. There were 2 defendants with the same name answering bail that day. They apologized to the non-murderous shoplifter, turned the car around and headed back to bring the right person in for questioning. Keystone Cops to the max. What a great way to get away with murder though, like if they knew somehow, and then they tried to shift off the blame of the murder onto the other suspect with the same name. Of course, I can't imagine they would make it that far considering they probably look completely different, but still, I'm sure you could do some shenanigans with the system. No, probably not. Story 5. I've got 2 from 25 years ago when I was a cop. One on one side of the badge and one from the other. The first, I got assigned a warrant service to pick up a wanted felon. Mr. Robertson was 6 foot tall, 250 pounds, long red hair, bushy red beard, and lived at, let's say, 123 Elm Street. Pretty distinctive dude. So I roll up to 123 Elm Street, and sure enough, there mowing his lawn in the front yard is the man himself. 6 foot, 250, red hair, red beard. I make contact with him. "Hey, Mr. Robertson, you've got warrants and it's time to go to jail." Hook him up, take him to jail. And in central booking, I get his property off him, and while filling out the inventory, happen to notice this guy is Mr. Robinson, not Robertson. Sure enough, the wanted guy was my guy's landlord, and his twin brother from another mother, doppelganger. When I had said Robertson, Robinson didn't even twig to the fact I hadn't said his name. He just heard the similar sounding name as his own. We had to walk the whole thing back and reactivate the warrant, then kicked him loose with a handshake and an apology. The one from the other side I had just gotten off duty at 2 a.m. and was driving home still in uniform. There wasn't any other traffic on the road, so I wasn't really surprised when a police car turned in behind me and started following me. I figured he was trolling for drunks and I was the only thing moving on the road. So he was just gonna follow me for a little bit to observe my driving, and then he would realize pretty quickly I was sober and peel off. Instead, another patrol car joined him, and then another, and another. Then all 4 lit me up and spread out behind me, blocking the road in a full felony stop. Well, this just got interesting. They went through the whole procedure and I carefully followed their instructions. When they finally got me out and saw my uniform, they just stopped for a few seconds while I was trying to figure out what the hell was going on. Then 3 of the officers got in their cars, turned off their lights, and took off, while the original officer told me I could put my hands down and explained what was going on. My car was a spot-on match for the suspect vehicle in an armed robbery and shooting that had just occurred right up the road. I'd driven right by the scene before the cops even got there a few minutes before the officer in the next district spotted me and thought I was the suspect. It was an interesting night. OP, what kind of car do you drive to be mistaken for someone who just committed an armed robbery and shooting? I feel like those guys would have like a blacked out van or something like that. For some reason, I just can't imagine someone committing an armed robbery, I assume on a bank, but I guess it doesn't have to be, but still, an armed robbery then getting into like a Honda Civic. It just doesn't make sense to me. Story 6. Not a police officer, but one night around 8 p.m., my fiance received a call. Officer: Derek, we have your health card. Tell us your whereabouts right now. This isn't Derek. You sound like Derek. Your buddies ratted you out and gave us your number. Now where are you? I'm not Derek, and I'm not telling you where I am. Who are you? This is Officer Smith. Stop messing around and tell us your location, Derek. Again, Derek is not my name. How do I know you're a real officer? Boy, if you don't tell me where you are, you're gonna be in much more trouble. My badge number is blank. Okay, fine, I'm at home at blank. If you don't show up in a police car, I'm not coming out. He hung up the phone, dialed 911 because we live in a bad area and wasn't sure if it was a fake call or not. Operator verifies that it was a correct badge number. The officer called back. He apparently misdialed by 1 number. He apologized but still blamed my fiance for being defensive and sounding guilty. Does that officer not understand that when anyone is being accused of something like insane, they're gonna sound guilty? Because at that point, the person accusing has already made up their mind, right? So everything they say is going to be, first of all, in their defense because that's the natural response to being accused of something you didn't do, and therefore they're going to sound defensive and probably guilty. Story 7. Since everyone else isn't a cop, I have a story from not being a cop. I was 16 and worked at a golf course mowing lawns and such. We got a call at home from the cops that said I'm a suspect in a hit-and-run accident because my plate numbers were on the car that drove away without stopping. The cop said that the car was maroon-colored. My car was gray. We told them and figured that that was that. The next day at work, there was a minor accident. An idiot coworker pulled a metal rake too hard and the rack holding it came down onto my forehead. It wasn't a deep wound, but it bled a lot. My boss took me to the ER to get my head superglued and, to be safe, took me home too. Thus, my car stayed at the golf course. That evening, a cop comes by and finds me with a head wound and my car is missing. I look quite guilty. By sheer luck, the cop calls someone after talking to my parents and discovers they got the guy and the plate numbers were close. I probably would have been arrested. Story 8. Someone had stolen a car and I went to go check it out. I'm driving behind what I think is the car. It had the same color vehicle and same car, and the mistake I made was not matching the license plates. I pulled them over, got out of the car, and realized it was my friend with his family. I reread the license plate and I noticed they were the same, except for the last letter on the plate. The last letter on the stolen car was J. The last letter on my friend's was I. I laughed it off and apologized, and we went out to dinner that night. Story 9. Not a police officer, but I was the wrong guy once. I was dating this girl, and when things didn't work out, she got vindictive. She had a copy of my car insurance and got a guy friend to pose as me to call the police and report my vehicle stolen. I go bebopping out of work one glorious Friday afternoon and get felony stopped by about 10 Dallas, Texas PD officers. Guns drawn on me and everything. Right outside of the large office complex I worked at. Turns out the people who reported my car stolen used their own phone number when filing the report, and eventually got caught and charged. That is some poor criminal planning. Using your own phone? Like, what are you thinking? They're the police! Story 10. There had been a string of robberies, 7 in 2 weeks in my neighborhood, so everyone was on high alert. I was home by myself and one of my dogs started puking, so I rushed to let him outside, forgetting my dad had set the alarm. We had a silent alarm, so I had no idea it had been tripped, sending out a dispatch request to the local 5-0. 5 minutes later, there was a knock on the door. I'm young, home alone by myself, and had been told to never answer the door if I was alone, so I didn't. They kept knocking. Long story short, they broke the door down, and they thought they had caught the burglars. Multiple cars, and I vaguely remember there being a canine unit involved. And the police had their suspect, a 9-year-old girl crying her eyes out. I was not the group of thieves, who ended up being caught about a week later. Story 11. Not an officer, but I live in a neighborhood in Indy that's going through a major revitalization right now, so it's very much in a transitional phase. We rent a house from a good friend of ours. He bought the house from some garbage people who had lived there for a long time. These people did, sold, made drugs. There was violence, escort services, everything. In general, the house was disgusting, unlivable, really. Just the worst. Well, the scumbags who lived here still tried to use our address even after 5 years. About a year and a half ago, one of the dudes used our address to renew his driver's license at the DMV. He even had the audacity to leave a note for us to call him when the license came in. Fast forward a few months, around Christmas time, we're all sitting around watching TV when we get a knock on the door. My husband answers and it's a SWAT team with guns drawn. They see my husband, who does not look like a druggie, and inside are our 2 little boys, my parents, and me nursing our baby, plus the Christmas tree and all the lovely trappings of our home. They immediately put their guns down and my husband and I have a lovely chat with them. Yeah, they had our house surrounded, guns drawn, the whole shebang, looking for this dude who was wanted on some kind of violent felony. We were upset at this dude, who I refer to as Big Nasty. Story 12. Obligatory, not a cop, but... One day I was on the way home and I noticed the police helicopter flying overhead. I lived in a big city at the time, so I thought nothing of it, until I was blocked in by 2 officers. Someone in an SUV very similar to mine had been trying to lure children at a school nearby, and was considered a dangerous offender due to previous convictions. They thought they had their guy, but all they had that day was a very pregnant and bewildered white girl in an SUV with her ice cream. The one officer that came to my window with his hand on his gun asked me if I knew anything about someone luring children in my Jeep. I looked at him in bewilderment. I have a panic disorder, hopefully that explains my reaction. And I just blurted out, I have 2 under 5 and 1 right here. What do I want anyone else's for? Luckily, they let me go after telling me what to keep an eye out for. I can laugh about it now. Honestly, having children of your own, pretty good cover to not kidnap children. At that point, you're like, yeah, I'm done with them. Don't want any more. Obviously, I know that's not how it works. I'm just making a funny. I'm a YouTube guy. I'm supposed to make funnies, right? No? Read stories? Okay, got it. Story 13. I live in a small town in rural England, and we used to get some trainees/new police officers from the Met there for their training. Me and some of my friends were teenagers at the time. We were walking to the supermarket because what else is there to do in a small town pre-internet? Suddenly, from out of nowhere, this police car comes screaming out of nowhere, sirens going, and screeches to a halt in front of us. A young guy, must have been only about 5 or so years older than us, jumps out and starts giving us the whole hairdryer treatment. He lines us up and starts taking our statements of what we had been up to in the last hour, and he was gloating at us. You lads are in trouble now, criminal damage, trespass, theft, you have really screwed up. With him was the local Bobby, and he came up to each of us in turn after the younger guy had grilled us and said, very jovially, "No, don't worry, lads, I'm sure it's a misunderstanding. We've had some reports of a break-in. You don't match the preliminary description, and I'm sure we'll get this cleaned up when we get the more detailed description come through." So the more detailed description comes through the radio, and the young guy is wearing the biggest crap-eating grin you have ever seen. The description didn't even remotely match. And honestly, the young guy looked so disappointed, we all just ended up feeling sorry for him. So yeah, that was probably quite embarrassing for him. Story 14. Once again, not a police officer, I was on the receiving end. I'd been at a small bar listening to some live music with a friend. We leave a couple hours later, and less than a mile from the bar, I get pulled over. No big deal, I pull into a circular driveway, and I get scared. No fewer than 4 police cars surround us, 2 behind, 2 in front. They come to both sides and leave a number of officers at our windows while they run our licenses. See, earlier, in between sets, a lady got off stage and warned any women there not to walk home or accept rides from strangers. Apparently, there had been a number of abductions and assaults in the area. My friend and I ignored it. We were not alone and not women. Finally, the cops give us our identification back and tell us we matched the description of the assaulters. Didn't say how they determined it was us, but apologized and sent us on our way. It wasn't until the next day we realized just how bad that could have been. Story 15. Not a police officer, but the person they talked to. I had just finished a cooking class and my husband was waiting for me. It was 9:30 at night and the parking lot for the class was in a back alley. Before we left, the officers turned on their lights and asked for identification and registration. They said in their system, our plates were registered to a green vehicle, ours was white. They let us go on our way since the registration was all correct, but told us to talk to the DMV and get it all cleared up. The next day I went to the DMV and they said that the only car with those plates was our current vehicle. Best we can figure is that we purchased this car in September, and in August our DMV had switched to a new computer system. So on the old system was registered to our old vehicle. On the new system they were registered to the new vehicle, and the police were still looking at the old system. This was in February, so 6 months after the switchover. I have to wonder how many other people they had incorrect vehicle information on. Story 16. I am not a police officer, however, I was the person detained, in handcuffs, by the police due to a bank robbery nearby. It took place in Brownsville, New York. I was driving a two-door gray '89 Buick. I am a 5'7" Caucasian male. By the way, this took place during the middle of a beautiful spring day. I mention this because that means there was no way what I look like could be mistaken. They held me for about an hour in the back of a police car. After they released me, they told me the bank footage showed the criminal was approximately a 6'4" African-American male driving a purple four-door Chevy. No apologies, just told me to be on my way. I did not have a cell phone back in '91, so I went to the closest payphone and explained what happened to my boss, so they can call my next customer and explain why I will be late. I always wonder how stuff like this happens. It just doesn't make any sense to me. Maybe they think you're a getaway driver or something, but they have no proof or reason to pull you over at all. And they even put you in handcuffs. They full-on detained you? What? I don't know what these officers were cooking, but someone should not have let them in the kitchen. Story 17. Not a cop, but the wrong person in question. There's another man 2 years younger than me who shares my first and last name. Exact same spelling. Only difference is the middle name. Police were investigating a county trust who was giving people housing assistance checks that they didn't qualify for. They would cash the assistance and give the trustee a percentage back. One of the civilians being investigated was the other guy. A plainclothes cop in an unmarked car shows up with a female holding a clipboard, identifies himself as a state trooper, and within 5 minutes is asking me for copies of my bank records. He's threatening to subpoena if I don't comply. This isn't the first time I've been mistaken for him. I used to get his mail all the time, and I even asked if they were really looking for me or the other guy, pointing out our different middle names. I got really suspicious really fast. A high-pressure situation, demanding access to my financial records, threats of subpoena and further legal action, so I started to doubt this was an actual officer and was in fact just a scammer. The badge he showed me was like a plastic square like my driver's license, further muddying the issue. I told him I wanted to speak with the police and called dispatch. 2 uniformed officers showed up 15 minutes later and confirmed that he was an officer. The woman with him was some kind of auditor and records keeper. After a further 15 minutes of questioning, the woman pulled the guy away and pointed out something on her phone. Yup, they wanted the other guy. Story 18. Not a police officer, but I'm in a class called Wildlife Law Enforcement, which is taught by a game warden. They have police powers and can be called in for backup if needed. My teacher is a great dude and he loves stories. Anyway, my local police force has a way of capturing people with outstanding warrants that may or may not be common. What they do is send a letter to the perp saying they've won a prize from the city. Apparently, however they deliver this makes it seem very legit. To receive your prize, you have to go to the community center at a certain date. Then the police get you after you sign in for your prize. So in my city, they set this up and sent a letter to a particular man with a very recognizable name. The day of the prize claiming, this very large old man comes in, and is soon fighting against 3 officers in this community center. He fought pretty damn hard thinking he was being jumped, but of course got cuffed and stuffed in the back of the squad car. The issue? They didn't check the important detail of AGE. They have captured Senior, when Junior was the one with the warrant. They assumed because of the man's very recognizable name that there could only be one. Story 19. Not a police officer, but had some officers turn up to my delivery suite looking for a man wanted for stealing a motorcycle. They'd watched CCTV footage of the theft, followed him on cameras in central London, and saw someone with the same description, black male wearing a hoodie and Nike trainers, enter the hospital and then the delivery suite. I'm usually a calm person, but I was slowly losing my mind as they demanded to come into the ward and speak to him. I'd repeatedly said that the man they were talking about had only left the ward for 15 minutes to get something from the canteen. They must have got people mixed up on camera, and also, his wife was currently in the process of pushing their son out of her kitty. So could they kindly screw off and come back later? Geez, they were acting like he was wanted for murder or something, telling me I was getting in the way of their investigation. Took my manager telling them that they were getting in the way of us providing safe care in a life-threatening situation to get them to leave. We got a phone call later saying that they would no longer need to speak with him as they got the right guy. Didn't even apologize. I'm assuming this is London, England, and as such, it's so not reassuring to hear that cops are like this all over. I was kind of hoping it was just a North American thing for cops to be belligerent and non-apologetic, but no, it's not. Also, sorry for the way I started that one. I don't know how to pronounce the way they typed it. You know that SpongeBob meme with the random caps and not caps and stuff? They were making fun of everyone else saying not a police officer while also doing it themselves, basically. And I did not know how to say it, so I did my best. Anyway, that's all the time we have for today. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you have a wonderful day or night wherever you are, and I'll see you in the next one.